morning, everyone. I'd like to open this Polk County Board of Commissioners meeting. It's May 18th. Extra agendas are on the back of the table for those wishing and looking for comments not on this agenda.
Mount St. Helens Day.
Mount St. Helens Day.
18th.
Where were you when?
42 years ago.
Yeah, we're backyard.
Is this a good time to mention I wasn't born yet?
That's graduation. Yeah, we know. We know. We know.
Wow. Eventually something could have fallen on the roof.
20 years old.
Went the other way.
We were coming back from the coast.
We're
Started.
first started.
Okay, it was on video. Perfect.
We're casual.
Yeah, now I look like.
No.
Ever. Looking for approval of agenda.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimous. Approval of minutes from May 11th.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimous. And approval of consent calendar.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed unanimous. So delivery of audit. Mr. Bingenheimer. Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for having me today.
So I handed out to you this morning, just now, the document that is our audit report. This very nice thick document. First thing I want to start by offering an apology that it's being delivered so late. This is not how I operate. It's not how our firm operates. We just kind of had a perfect storm this year with different things going on that just, only so many hours in a day you can work with lots of stuff going on. So it has been issued kind of late this year, much later than I ever hope to ever have it again. So I do want to offer that first. But we have issued our report on the financial statements. Basically, this is what we would consider an unmodified report on the financial statements, which in a nutshell says, in our opinion, the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position and results of operations of the county for the year ended June 30, 2021. If you were to turn to page one of this document, you'd come to the statement net position. This is kind of the high level look at the county, and its assets and liabilities and where it is at the end of the year. So you ended the year with total assets of $90.7 million. Some deferred outflows related to pension items of $15 million. Total liabilities of $70.5 million. And deferred inflows of $1.7 million. And all that nets down to a net position of the county of $33.8 million at the end of June 30, 2021. Turning the page, you'll see that that is a change of just under $300,000 from the prior year. So your net position was relatively constant between the 2 years, decreased, by just under $300,000. Total expenses of the county was $72.6 million. And then, beyond those two statements, those are the kind of high level statements. You get into all the detail of the various funds and governmental funds. Your governmental fund balances ended the year at $22.9 million. And that is actually an increase of just under $2.5 million. And that's shown on page 5 is the change in your governmental fund balances of $2.4 million. So from there, you start getting into budget actual comparisons for the various, major funds that are presented. You have the internal service fund. Those internal service funds get blended up into those government-wide statements. So I'm not going to spend any time with that. But beyond then, those basic statements, you have a very long section of footnotes. Couple things I would like to point out in the footnotes that I usually point out to you. This will not be new for some people. But if you were to look at page 33, this is a summary of the county's long-term obligations. So there you have, at the end of the year, you have, actual debt obligations of $14.8 million. And then to that, we add some additional long-term obligations that have to be recorded. The largest of which is your net pension liability, which this year is at $42 million. And that represents the county's proportionate share of the net pension liability of PERS as a whole. So this is your little slice of the PERS pie. And PERS is kind of one of this number has a lot of volatility in it. In part because what the actuaries do that work for PERS, they look at the projected retirement payouts into the future, and then bring those back to a present value using a discount rate. And then they compare that to the value of the assets held as of a specific date. And that date is always going to be measured at 1 year prior to June 30th. So we're actually looking at this present value of these payments compared to the value of the assets held at June 30, 2020. And you think about where were we at in the pandemic at June 30, 2020, where was our financial markets? They were still, they had not yet started their recovery. So we have kind of this year, a very large increase in this of $8 million, but that's largely related to just that volatility of the underlying assets held for PERS. I spent the last 2 days at our state CPA Society's governmental conference. We had a presentation from a gentleman from PERS. And that's one of the things that they did point out is that, we've had if you move then to the valuation of June 30, 2021, we had a large recovery of the value. So when we look at, what it's going to be for June 30, 22, we actually expect to see that net pension liability decrease. Not so much because PERS liability has gone down, but the value of the assets have gone up. And of course, in the last, few months, we've seen, once again, the markets are taking a negative turn. Don't know where it's going to be at June 30th. But I would, so I said that there's a lot of volatility in this number. But it's something I think, is important for you to be aware of, that there's still, regardless of that, there's still going to be a very significant, net pension liability that all governments are going to have to foot the bill on sooner or later. There is some additional information on PERS. If you go back to page 59, this will kind of show some information on how that proportionate share has changed over the years, starting from 2013 to the plan year ending June 30, 2020, when they did their last valuation that was presented in this. So you can see how that has changed over time. Where your proportionate share, your actual proportionate share of the total liability has gone down a little bit, from 0.22% to 0.19%. And then the following page is basically looking at your contributions that you've made compared to your covered payroll. You can see there over that same time period, it's gone from about 10.9% to 19.58%. So, every year your contributions to PERS has been growing. I don't anticipate that changing anytime soon. Beyond those statements for related to those, once again, you get into a lot of detail on individual budget actual stuff. I'm not going to spend any time on those. So I want to turn then to page 99. And so in addition to our report on the financial statements themselves, there are 3 other reports that we issue in conjunction with your audit. First one is our report required under the Oregon minimum standards for audits municipal corporations. This report covers 2 items. The first is compliance with certain Oregon laws and regulations that we are required to look at and see whether we detect any instances of non-compliance. You can see those different laws and regulations there. And the only thing that we found was a minor thing, basically in your budgetary practice. Each fund you can appropriate by program, but if you appropriate by program, you also have to have then separate amounts for any debt service or transfer amounts. Well, the ARPA fund had lots of transfers out that were not separately appropriated. It's a very small minor thing on that one. The second part of that report talks very briefly about internal controls. And this is talking about internal controls of the financial statements as a whole. And I'm going to use that as a segue into the next report, which is a report under government auditing standards. This talks about 2 similar things. Starts talking about internal controls. So as part of every audit, we always come in and we gain an understanding of the internal controls of the organization. And we do that to help us identify those areas that we need to pay a higher attention to because perhaps there is not as strong an internal controls over them. So use that as part of our risk analysis in approaching the audit. Also, it gives us the opportunity, if we see any weaknesses in internal controls, we could be bringing those forth if we had any concerns. And we don't have any concerns for the internal controls over the financial reporting as a whole. And then that report also then briefly mentions about compliance with other laws, regulations, contract provisions, anything else basically that would have a material effect on the financial statements. So we do look at that, and we did not note anything that indicated that there was any kind of non-compliance that would have a material effect on the financial statements as a whole. So then our 4th report that we issue is our report under the requirements of the uniform guidance. And this is the federal audit portion of the engagement. So these requirements require us to look at specific federally funded programs and test various things, including, do you have internal controls over the compliance associated with that program, as well as did you comply with the program requirements? And so we do have a couple things to point out here. So one of the programs we looked at, the county was given some money upfront by the state health authority. And you were then to be reporting to them how those funds were expended. Now, of course, this went to the health department. And I know during COVID, everything just about the health department was doing was related to, COVID. I mean, that's just, what they were doing. Even though that's the case, that didn't mean that you were still required to have detailed records of how that money was expended. And that's where we had some problems. We didn't really, weren't able to be given, detailed amounts of how it was expended. So we do bring forth that as basically an item of note that, we knew it was, like I said, we knew that everything in the health department basically was COVID related. But, as auditors, we need to see detailed supporting documentation of that. So we do have that as a finding in here. Likewise, there's associated, internal control. So, what we want to see as auditors is, every time, somebody is submitting something for, to either a state or federal agency, reporting grant expenditures of any kind, whether it's, reporting what you already received or whether you're seeking reimbursement. We would kind of expect to see that, documentation would be there supporting those dollar amounts that are reported, and the fact that maybe somebody else has double checked those numbers, just like any other system of internal controls. You never want one person doing everything. So we always recommend, have one person do it, have another person verify it and double check it before it's submitted. So those are the kind of items we found in that. We'll be talking, if management needs to talk to us about some ideas on that, I'm more than happy to discuss that with them. I'll give you some idea of though your expenditures of federal awards. So on page 111, you'll see the total of all your federal expenditures, which was just over $7 million of federal expenditures. And the largest programs under that, of course, was the Corona Relief Fund. And then second behind that was the, I have a hard time saying this one always, the epidemiology program that dealt with basically contact tracing and such for COVID related issues. So that's, our report that we've issued. Be happy to try and answer any questions you might have, or.
Just a quick question on page 111, under these categories, was there a specific category that was particularly deficient in reporting?
So if you look on page 111, the one that we had the finding on was the one that's listed there. The last one under total Department of Health and Human Services of $768,000. That's the epidemiology and laboratory capacity grant. That was the one. The federal programs are always, can be a challenge to audit, particularly in the, in the environment we've lived in the last 2 years. Honestly, I've had more findings on federal grants in the last 2 years than I have for a long time because of two things. One, that you were just basically, money was thrown at you and you were told, go spend. With very little guidance, really.
Guidance that changed over time.
And it did. It changed. They kept changing their mind. So, between the two things, while at the same time, you're suffering same issues as everybody else with reduced staffing time available and trying to, navigate a new working regimen for people working remotely. I said this last year, I've had more of these than I have ever had, but it's just related to lots of different things going on. And of course, auditors always get to come after the fact and, we nitpick things apart. Kind of that's our job, unfortunately. But that's kind of, what you pay us to do. So, and it's what kind of the federal government expects us to be doing with that, when we're auditing their monies.
I'm grateful that we didn't have more than that.
Saying
Based
myself,
on all the complications and that all of the issues that you just described, it's like, good job, team. Great job, team.
that would have been our tracers that we hired. How many contracts did we have throughout the county? It was ridiculous. Excellent.
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm hoping. So we have, the next big thing is, county's given a big chunk of money in ARPA. And, there again, I expect we'll have different issues under the ARPA funds that we have to deal with. So yeah, there's just lots of more federal money being pushed out to local governments than we've ever seen. I mean, it's, historic proportions. So I think overall, a few little trips is going to happen. That's not unexpected, given everything.
Yeah.
You good?
I've got one minor question on the, I was very interested to hear of the delay in the rate of return. That's part of the calculation in the PERS liability. We have LGIP rates of return over time, right? That's given to us. Yeah. I'd just be curious to see that, just to look at it. Very, very little variation over time.
Well, it's just a little interest rate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it is a different pool of money.
Right.
So yeah, that you can't really,
PERS is investing. I mean, our pool is basically as low an interest rate as you get, but as safe as it gets.
yes.
So.
What are the assets? Sorry, I'm new here.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
bottom line on PERS is there are a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of delays in timing. Rumor is that our employer rate, not this coming fiscal year, because we're in the second year of, they change employer rates every 2 years. Next year's rates are going to be down. They're going to reduce them, which in my opinion may not be the wisest move because there is this liability out there.
Yeah.
Keep progressing our rates to go up so we don't kick the can down the road. But there's a lot of talk about the rates going from the normal 4 or 5% every 2 years to maybe 2% this next time, which again, it's just my personal opinion, but Brad's right. There is so many variables. If they change actuarial assumptions, if they change rate of return on the fixed rate for tier 1, if they do a whole bunch of those things, it's a moving target. And there's years that we look like, oh, we made 12 million, we've reduced our liability that way. And then even in a good return year, we lose 8 million. And that's
Yeah.
because of the delays.
Yeah. Okay. And of course, associated with that also is, PERS is based on a percentage of payroll. It's a percentage. So just like everybody else, you have to pay more for employees. Your employee costs have continued to increase.
Right.
This just is a multiplier on top of that. So yeah, it is a big challenge. The good news really is that Oregon PERS is a lot better off than a lot of other states. They're expecting when they get everything said and done with their latest valuation, they are expecting to see us being basically funded at about 80%. There are some states that it's less than 50%. So, and it is. So it does kind of kick the can down the road. We just haven't kicked down as far down as other people have. But yeah, and I'm a big believer that, if as public employees, part of the agreement was when they retire, they get this PERS benefit. And more than once, the state legislature has tried to do something to change that. And more than once, the Supreme Court has taken this state legislature to task and slapped there and says, no, that was a contractual agreement. You can change things going forward, but what's been promised in the past, you have to live to. So, yeah, it's going to continue to be a big issue for governments for a long time. So.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Good, great. Thank you.
Thank you for having me today.
And do we have a need for an executive session today?
Yes, sir. The board will now meet in executive session pursuant to ORS 192-660 sub 2D to conduct deliberations when persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations.